along those lines, and an issue that I know has, that has kind of, I don't know that dominated is the right word, but something that's been ongoing for years now. You and I both are history people. We love learning about things of the past, especially in our own community. That Cahaba Project, it's the most historic area that Trussville has, and I know it's been kind of one of those hot button issues over the last few years. Just kind of take us through what's happened the last few years and what's kind of the issue at hand right now.
Well, full disclosure, I have owned 2 homes in the Cahaba Project, the Flagkeep Village, or whatever you'd like to call it. When I first was offered a job here, my wife and I were looking for a home, and we looked all over the city, and we kept coming back to the Cahaba Project, and mainly because it reminded her so much of her hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, with the tree canopy and all the older houses that look the same. And so we bought a fixer-upper on Oak Street, and we did all the interior work ourselves and modernized it, and didn't change a thing on the outside, because back then it was just it was just Beth and me and our 2 golden retrievers, and so we didn't have kids yet. So we had this cute little 2-bedroom bungalow, and we just loved the neighborhood. And then in researching the neighborhood, I fell in love with it even more, because it as it turns out, and as you well know, it was a WPA project to help get us out of the Depression. So basically, the federal government paid people to build these homes, and then rented the homes to people who were later able to own the homes. So, and that neighborhood was the first Trussville, really. It was the first neighborhood in Trussville, and Trussville was nothing but a bump in the road up until that point. And it was the only one of its kind really ever done in the United States. Most of the WPA projects, in terms of housing development, were farmland. They would give you a house with several acres of land to farm. This was more generated for white collar families, people who had a job, but people who also could come back and have a garden. And they, some people had livestock. I've been told that my backyard actually had a couple of horses in the back. So,
wow.
But it's just the history of the neighborhood and the ambiance of the neighborhood is it's like no other. And a couple of years ago, I gave a tour to a couple of folks who were on the Alabama Historical Committee, and they were just amazed and very moved by this neighborhood. And they said that there's nothing like this in the whole rest of the country. And it's a very special place. And to me, it is the most historic part of the city of Trussville. And up until, probably 8 years ago, it really wasn't very sought after. And you could buy a house in the Cahaba Project for, very inexpensively. And then when they decided to renovate the old high school and turn it into Cahaba Elementary, that's when the neighborhood really took off in terms of being sought after, because all of a sudden it was a place where, hey, my kids can walk to school. How neat would that be? And that's one of the things that led us back to the neighborhood after we had sold our house on Oak Street and moved into another subdivision. It was enticing for us to have our kids be able to walk to school, or as my son does to this day, still ride his bike to school. It's not something you find everywhere. And no. It has driven home values up, and the neighborhood is more sought after than ever. And unfortunately, that brings some unwanted side effects. We're now dealing with issues of speculation and people wanting to buy these historic homes, and um, and demolish the homes and build big new kind of mansions in the neighborhood, and that's where I have worked really hard to try to prevent that from happening to a certain degree, and um, at least curb it some, and try to educate people on the historic value of the neighborhood.
Right. And is that sort of the issue at hand, is property rights versus historical integrity? Is
I
that kind
think
of where the
so.
issue
I think
lies?
that you have to walk a fine line between a person's personal property rights and the ability to preserve history. Um, but unfortunately, what we're seeing is very little compromise between those two groups. You know, in 2017, my goal was for the city uh, to form a historic preservation committee, not just for the Cahaba projects, but for other structures in the city that were deemed historic. I think every city needs one of those. Um, and the problem with forming that committee was there's a subset of people in the neighborhood that just felt like that would be too draconian, and then there was another subset in the neighborhood that wanted it draconian, that wanted these houses to be preserved exactly as they are. So there's got to be a middle ground there somewhere, and I don't know exactly where it is. What I do know is that the neighborhood is too important for us to allow people to come in willy nilly and knock a house down and build back something that doesn't match the rest of the neighborhood. And that's unfortunately what I see happening now.
Yeah, and you know me, I totally agree. The bulk of my book, that's the Trussville, Alabama, A Brief History, so much of it is built around that neighborhood. I mean, you can't write a book of any substance about Trussville's history without that neighborhood, and trying to preserve it the best you can. I agree. Walking that fine line seems really difficult. I don't know if there's a way, like if a house is deemed needing demolition, because these are houses that were built in the late 1930s, is it, are there regulations or whatever you want to call it, that when a house is rebuilt that it must meet certain criteria? I don't know if, if the facade of the house is built back to mimic what was
Yeah.
there originally. You're right. I think it's hard to walk that line, but it definitely seems like a conversation that needs to be
Well,
had with the right
and
people.
I will be the first one to tell you there probably are houses that are on the historic registry in this neighborhood that are probably not salvageable. You have to remember that there's a lot of underground water that goes through the Cahaba project, and some of these houses are on sinking foundations. Some of them haven't been upkept very well over the years, and there are termite issues and foundation issues. Um, that's one situation. And look, if they are deemed that those houses cannot be salvaged and lived in, then yeah, they probably should be demolished. But at the same time, we have to talk about what goes back up. There are building plans in the Trussville Library and the archives that show exactly what the original plans for the project houses were. So why not build the exterior that looks like a project home? If you want to build a larger project home, then build one that looks like something that's on North and South Mall. Um, I think that the people in the neighborhood would be perfectly fine with that. But when you build something that is of a completely different architectural style in this neighborhood, it devalues the neighborhood, in my opinion, no matter how big and how expensive the house is that you build.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, it obviously, the home itself, if it's a big mansion type house, obviously has value in terms of money, but the historical value is diminished, and that's something that, like you've talked about, that's something that needs to be preserved as much as possible. especially when this neighborhood, these homes are one of a kind, not in Jefferson County, not just in central Alabama, not just in Alabama, but across the entire country. I mean, it's just a gem of an area, and I wish more people would come to realize that. I don't know if there's more of a push publicly that, I mean, I'm one of the people who's written tons about it, that we can put out there just for education, just so people know that they can read about it, that, these are your roots. This is the city you call home. Yes, you've got the downtown entertainment district. Yes, you've got new fields and stuff like that. But every now and then it's nice to look back and see where your
Absolutely.
city came
And
from.
it and there's just nothing like it. I mean, there's nothing like it anywhere. One of the experts that came and did the tour said that this was on the level of historic Williamsburg in Virginia, and that just said this is just a jewel in this country, and it needs to be. It really needs to be preserved if you care about history. And I happen to be one of those people who does. I'm the son of a retired history professor, and I just I'm a history buff, and I think that um, it's one of those things that really should be talked about, and and cherished. Honestly, I mean, when you think about what people were going through during that time period, and every one of us that have grandparents that lived through the Great Depression can tell you about what it was like, and how important uh, uh, Franklin Roosevelt's programs were back in the 30s to get us out of the situation we were in, and this just happened to be one of those. I mean, this gave people an opportunity to make a living and then have a roof over their head as they went out and tried to get back into an economy that was just devastated. So it gave people a chance. It gave people hope, um, and it's one of those things that should be remembered and should be cherished, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Well, we'll hope that it can be, as much as possible. And I'm never against writing some stuff about that area. I walk there often. I just love that feel that's there. Obviously, I wasn't around in the 30s, 40s, or 50s, or any in that time frame, but it gives you such like a step back in time. Like I don't have to just look in the book. I can go there and see it, and
Well,
that's
someone
just
told me
amazing
once
to
it's
me.
like walking through the Cahaba Project is like walking into a Norman Rockwell painting. It's just, yeah. I mean, you just see the kid whizzing by on the bicycle, and you see the trees and the homes, and I mean, it's a special place, and it's always been a special place. And if you spend any time in that neighborhood at all, you realize how special it is. It took us about 10 minutes when we were first looking at homes back in 2003 to realize what a special neighborhood it was.